Good morning. It's April 18th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the U.S. announcement on the list of electric vehicles eligible for tax credits under the Inflation Reduction Act. The list of 16 electric vehicle models does not include South Korea's Hyundai or Kia. But the news is apparently not a disaster for South Korean car makers. We turn to an expert to find out why. The UN Security Council held an emergency meeting on North Korea's firing of the regime's solid-fueled ICBM, the Hwasong-18, with no agreement reached due to the usual opposition from China and Russia. BTS J-Hope begins his mandatory military service today. The 29-year-old is the second member of the supergroup to join the military after Jin, who began his term 4 months ago. The U.S. has announced 16 electric vehicle models that will receive subsidies under its Inflation Reduction Act. South Korea's Hyundai and Kia were both left out, but industry analysts suggest that overall decrease in the number of vehicles is not the worst situation for South Korea. Our Choi Soo-hyung has our top story this morning.
The U.S. government announced on Monday local time that 16 electric vehicles would be eligible for subsidies of up to $7,500 in accordance with the detailed guidelines of the Inflation Reduction Act. All the 16 selected models are American-made, including Tesla's Model 3 and Model Y, Chevrolet's Bolt and Equinox, and Ford's E-Transit and Mustang. As a result, not only Hyundai and Kia by Hyundai Motor Group, but also Nissan and some American-made electric cars that were originally eligible for subsidies have been excluded from the list. The new guidelines for the IRA have reduced the number of eligible models significantly as battery requirements were strengthened in addition to the final assembly requirements in North America. If more than 50% of the battery parts are manufactured and assembled in North America, a subsidy of $3,750 will be given. An additional subsidy of $3,750 is given when more than 40% of the key minerals are mined and processed in the United States or FTA countries. In this regard, industry officials have analyzed that the decrease in the number of eligible vehicles overall is not the worst situation for South Korea, because the number of vehicles getting the benefits has been reduced from over 40 electric vehicle models. In response to the IRA guidelines, Hyundai Motor Group is speeding up the construction of an electric vehicle and battery plant in Georgia, set to open by 2025, and it is also considering replacing the Chinese-made batteries for the GV70 model with North American-made batteries. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
Amid allegations of U.S. spying on South Korea after the recent leak of intelligence documents, Washington says it has a good relationship with Seoul. Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh made the remarks during a briefing on Monday, where she was asked if the U.S. would apologize to Seoul if wiretapping allegations turn out to be true. Singh added the matter is being reviewed. Regarding speculations of the leaked documents having been forged, as were agreed by the defense ministers of both countries, the press secretary said that's also under review while refraining from giving specifics. And on the same day, National Security Council Coordinator John Kirby said that there have been no damage to partnerships with allies because of the leaks. The UN Security Council meeting on North Korea's launch of its first solid-fuel Hwasong-18 ICBM ended with no fruitful outcome. The North slammed the meeting, saying its strategic weapon development is a means of self-defense. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Last Thursday, North Korea fired its solid-fuel Hwasong-18 intercontinental ballistic missile for the first time. The United Nations Security Council responded by holding an open meeting at UN headquarters in New York on Monday, with the meeting being convened at the request of South Korea, the United States, and Japan. During the meeting, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield strongly condemned North Korea's repeated violations of Security Council resolutions, calling for a united response from the international community on what she called a threat to not just Northeast Asia, but also to world peace and security. Along with the U.S., other UNSC members, including Britain and France, expressed concerns over continued provocations from North Korea. But China again backed its ally, saying that United States military exercises near the Korean peninsula using nuclear aircraft carriers and B-52 bombers made North Korea uneasy. Russia's ambassador to the UN also slammed the U.S., saying that the UNSC meetings should not be used for political propaganda purposes, adding that additional sanctions against North Korea is illegal and unilateral and would not take into account the desperate situation inside the country. Meanwhile, in a statement carried by the state-run Korean Central News Agency, Vice Chairman of the Central Military Commission of the ruling Workers' Party, Lee Byung-chul, accused the UNSC of engaging in domestic interference against Pyongyang. He also stressed that the North's advanced strategic weapons development is a legitimate self-defense measure aimed at defending itself from threats from the U.S. Lee also slammed the U.S. for calling the North's exercise of rights to self-defense a provocation and threat through the mobilization of the UNSC. The vice chairman is known to have led Pyongyang's nuclear and missile development since the early months of Kim Jong-un's rule in late 2011. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
China is holding a major military activity in the West Sea amid heightened tensions in the region. China's Maritime Safety Administration said Monday that the military operations will take place in the West Sea on Tuesday between 9 a.m. and 12 p.m. with no further details given. The agency warned mariners against entering the waters off the coast of Shandong province, which is often used for military drills. This comes after China held large-scale drills around Taiwan in a warning to the self-governing island following its president's visit to the U.S., which Beijing believes is a violation of its One China policy. The U.S. last week proposed an ambitious plan to make 2 out of every 3 new vehicles electric by the next decade. But according to a recent survey conducted by the University of Chicago and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, less than half of Americans are willing to switch to electric cars. For more on this story, we're joined by Mr. Tues, Senior Director at the Korea Economic Institute. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. First off, the Biden administration's plan to go all eco-friendly when it comes to cars is quite ambitious and also for a good cause. But how can this proposal be made appealing to customers?
So over the last year, we've seen EV sales in the United States increase by 65%. That's higher than in the rest of the world. So there is some pickup, but we're still at about 7% of the market being EV sales as opposed to gas-powered vehicles. But this is where the tax subsidies in the Inflation Reduction Act come into play to try and incentivize Americans to transition to electric vehicles. But at the same time, there's also funding in the infrastructure bill as well previously that was passed last year that would allow for the taking and construction of essentially an EV charging network along the U.S. interstate highway system. And what this would do is it would help to take and alleviate the concerns Americans have about long distance travel in EVs. Because when you look at a lot of polling, one of the things that does come out is a lot of the anxiety tends to be what we call range anxiety. And so if the administration, in combination with the purchase tax credits, is able to take and build out an EV subsidy network, and they've already talked to Tesla about having it open its network to other EVs as well, then I think we'll start to see some of this change, and you'll continue to see more pickup of EVs in the United States.
Right. It definitely is eco-friendly and cost-efficient when we look at it in a long term. But the recent figures are quite daunting for South Korean car makers. South Korean automakers might be up for the challenge given that, for instance, Hyundai Motor and Kia accounted for only about 4% of electric vehicles that were sold in the U.S. last year. Now, Troy, how can South Korean car makers take this opportunity?
So I think one thing that South Korean car makers have to look to is leasing their vehicles rather than immediate sales. In the comment period, South Korea, as well as European providers, asked the United States to take and allow for leasing vehicles to not meet or have to meet the assembly requirements in the U.S. And so that means any vehicle that's leased would be eligible for the tax credit. And so while this is not necessarily the standard model that maybe Hyundai and Kia might try to use to sell EVs in the United States, in the short term, this is one path that they can take. At the same time, I think we also need to look at this in the broader context. When we look at the cars that came out today, while they were all American that are eligible for the tax credit, only 10 vehicles now are eligible for the full tax credit in the United States. And that actually puts Hyundai and Kia in a better position because there's now fewer vehicles that actually can receive the full tax credit. For example, Tesla, not all of their vehicles are eligible for the full tax credit. And in the grand scheme of things, Tesla still accounts for about 70% of the US EV market. So there are advantages here for Hyundai and Kia if they can switch more to leasing, if they can find cost efficiencies to drive down the cost of their vehicles a little bit to be able to match some of the tax credit differences. I think there's real opportunities.
I see. And also, speaking of vehicles, we cannot not talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. Washington has announced a list of EV models that a reporter just introduced that will receive subsidies under the law, IRA. Now, South Korea's Hyundai and Kia were both left out. Now, how is this a good or bad news for South Korea?
Well, this is what we expected all along. We knew when the act was passed that the first step to receive the tax credit was that it had to be assembled in the United States or Canada or Mexico. And at the moment, Hyundai and Kia don't have an assembly facility capable of producing EVs in either or any of those three countries. And so what that means is that immediately they're taken off the table. Now, the good news, as I mentioned, is that because there's a second layer of qualifications for the tax subsidies, which deal with the mineral content and the content of components in the batteries, that means none of their competitors are going to necessarily be able to take and produce as many vehicles either that are compliant or to receive the full tax credit. So as I mentioned, Tesla, some of their models only receive half the tax credit. And also Ford, for example, has talked about the production troubles it's having in taking and meeting demand. So you have these supply chain issues that are going to take and slow some of the growth in their competitor side. You have the battery issue, which is going to take and allow Hyundai and Kia to remain more competitive. And I think the other thing to keep in mind here is that in the long run, South Korea is actually going to benefit greatly from this because the estimates right now are that in a few years, South Korean firms from LG, Samsung, and SK On will make and basically be most of the batteries in the United States, up to 69% of them. And so while there will be short-term challenges for Hyundai and Kia, for South Korean battery manufacturers, this is going to be a boon.
Right, because the batteries are a huge part of the EVs obviously being manufactured.
Yeah, and they're also, Ford is going to be using South Korean EVs at plants they're building in Tennessee and Kentucky. Honda is as well. So you're seeing a lot of companies reach out to South Korean battery manufacturers.
Right, too early to be a letdown.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Troy, so much for your insights and connecting with us all the way from DC this morning.
Thank you.
BTS member J-Hope begins his mandatory military service on Tuesday, becoming the second member of the group to enlist. The 29-year-old will first begin his 5 weeks of basic training at an army boot camp in Gangwon-do province. His enlistment comes as the group's agency Big Hit Music earlier this month announced that he will fulfill his mandatory service as an active duty soldier in the army, but said there will be no ceremony for fans on the day of his entry. J-Hope hosted his last live stream on Weverse, a fan community platform, last Friday to bid farewell to his fans. He follows fellow BTS member Jin, who joined the military last December. Just in time for the 70th year of the Seoul-Washington Alliance, a group of students from New York took a field trip to South Korea last week. They explored a range of K-culture activities, including K-pop, of course, which they enjoyed and appreciated. Our Kim Jung-sil spent a day with them.
Students from New York wearing traditional Korean clothing, hanbok, are visiting Gyeongbokgung Palace.
1, 2, 3.
They stop at every step to take pictures, as if to capture each moment. On this field trip, a total of 105 students from 5 schools in New York came to South Korea. Democracy Prep public schools teach Korean as a second language and have Korean culture classes. This is because the founder of the school spent time in South Korea and was dedicated to bringing Korean education and culture back to the U.S. One student said she enrolled in one of the schools because of her mother's interest in K-dramas.
When my mom first came to America, she was obsessed with K-dramas. She would watch them on cable, and she wouldn't understand the language, but she would read the subtitles. And she was always really involved in the culture.
Korean is really core to the starting of Democracy Prep, our school, and it's something that we also really value in terms of offering our students a perspective of a culture and language that is not something that they've seen before, most likely. We really value the Korean values around education.
In the afternoon, the students gathered at hiker ground near the Cheonggyecheon stream to experience the more modern side of Korea. Hiker ground is run by the Korea Tourism Organization, which said this is a good opportunity for future generations to build friendships during a year when the two countries are celebrating the 70th anniversary of their alliance. As you can see, the students are using these sets at hiker ground as backgrounds for their dances, just like K-pop idols. In a K-pop dance class, students learn how to dance to one of the latest K-pop hits. Many of the students picked up the dance moves quickly and filmed their own music videos.
I think it was a fun experience, but I was a little nervous because it was really short. But I think I'm happy with the overall video. I think it was a good experience that really opened my eyes, and I do look forward to coming back to Korea eventually.
The students we met said they hope to use their knowledge and experience of the Korean language and culture in their future endeavors, and said this won't be their last time visiting South Korea. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
Imagine a robot that mimics every one of your moves, even when it's not right next to you, just like the film Avatar. Well, it is possible with this locally developed motion sensing robot. Our Cho Sang-min tells us more.
Avatar is a film that opened our eyes to the new world of cinema, not just through its colorful and sharp computer graphics, but also with the technological imagination it succeeded in emulating on screen. One of the examples would be the technology that links Jake, the lead character, with the blue-skinned alien creature and makes it move freely according to how he wishes. And recently, local researchers in Korea have succeeded in bringing a part of that technology to actual life. The humanoid robot here makes the exact movements with its fingers, hands, wrist, neck, and waist of a person sitting in the driver's seat from far away. Because the user is wearing a type of headgear with a VR screen attached, he or she can see what the robot sees. The robot can sense the user's motions remotely and either turn on or off a switch, move heavy objects, and even shake hands. The technology is also equipped with highly sophisticated motion sensors and 4 infrared cameras that can detect the user's movements however subtle they are. And the overall user experience of it offers an additional feeling of presence and hands-on experience, as users can feel the weight in their arm when the robot is holding a heavy object. Another example of that would be the trembling of the arm when holding onto an electric drill. The team says all it takes to work is a wireless network to get it up and running. As of now, they have succeeded in operating a robot in Seoul from their Ulsan office.
The robot's vision and the data make it feel as if they are right inside it.
The team say the robot could be used in various hazardous working situations and construction sites, as it can carry out delicate and dangerous tasks. Cho Sang-min, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. Top Kremlin critic Vladimir Kara-Murza Jr. has been sentenced to 25 years in prison in Russia's latest crackdown on opposition figures. The sentence was handed down by a Russian court on Monday on charges including treason and spreading fake news about the Russian army. Kara-Murza is an award-winning human rights activist, a journalist, and a dual Russian-British citizen. The 41-year-old has been vocal in his opposition to Russia's war in Ukraine. He was arrested in Moscow in April last year, just hours after a CNN interview where he said Russia was run by a, quote, regime of murderers. He also denounced Russia's invasion of Ukraine in a speech to the Arizona House of Representatives in March of that year. It was the same month that Russia criminalized criticism of its military. The court's conviction has been denounced by Western governments and human rights organizations. Moving over to Sudan now, at least 180 people have been killed over 3 days of heavy fighting in a power struggle between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary rapid support forces. Now, the clashes broke out across the country on a Saturday, local time. The international community has called for peace, with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying there's a shared deep concern among allies. Meanwhile, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development has said that the presidents of Kenya, South Sudan and Djibouti will go to the Sudanese capital of Khartoum to try to broker a ceasefire. The violence comes on the back of a proposal that would transition the country's military government to civilian rule and would see the RSF become part of the Sudanese army. Now, the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation has arrested 2 men for allegedly running a secret Chinese police station in New York City's Chinatown. Both men have been charged with conspiring to act as agents for China and obstruction of justice. Prosecutors also charged 34 others who live in China in connection to the case. The operatives allegedly established the station on behalf of the Chinese Ministry of Public Security in early 2022 and harassed Chinese dissidents in the U.S. But it was closed just a few months later after operatives became aware of the FBI's investigation. The secret station is believed to be part of a global network of such facilities operating in 53 countries. Beijing denies operating the stations and called them service centers for overseas nationals. And finally, in the U.S. state of North Carolina, a man relaxing in his yard had a startling encounter with a wild bear. Surveillance footage from a doorbell camera shows David Oppenheimer relaxing in his lounge chair when the black bear casually strolls next to him. Now, both froze in shock after noticing each other, with the bear running away after a standoff lasting several seconds. Oppenheimer said that he had received a notification earlier in the day to keep an eye out for a wandering bear, but saw nothing on his outdoor cameras before going outside to enjoy the nice weather.
Good morning. Quick-moving showers rolled in this morning, and we may see the intensity increase during the earlier part of the day, dropping heavy rain of 20 millimeters an hour in some areas due to atmospheric instability. So Chungcheong-namdo and Jeollabuk-do province could see up to 60 millimeters of rainfall, while the rest of the country will receive 5 to 40 millimeters. Rain should be light in central parts of the country and will let up in the afternoon, while the south coast and Jeju could see rain into Wednesday. Along with rain, those of us on the west coast and Jeju need to brace for strong winds with an advisory issued. So Jeju Island will be rainy and windy all day today. Temperature-wise, highs will go up a couple of degrees higher in the capital. Then summer warmth is ahead for Wednesday in Seoul with an expected high of 27 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, southern provinces will see highs going down a couple of degrees lower today with 23 degrees in Daegu, Gwangju, Busan topping out at 20 degrees. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That's all we have for today's New Day at Arirang. Thanks for watching.